The winter that took Elias Carter's family did not come fast like a storm, nor gentle like fallen snow. It crept in slow, silent, and mean, like a sickness with cold hands. It seeped through the walls of the Carter homestead, through the cracks of the shutters, through the thin coats and blankets the family had patched year after year. By the time the thaw came, the Carters were gone, every one of them but Elias. The farm sat quiet now. No chickens scratching in the dirt, no horse stamping in the barn, no laughter from the small cabin his father had built log by log. Just the wind, hollow and dry, passing through the leafless oaks and rattling the loose boards on the fence. Elias stood by the doorway, the one his father used to walk through every morning with the same gentle grunt, as if waking up was the hardest job a man could have. His hat was in his hands, not on his head, because it didn't feel right wearing it inside the old place anymore. His boots were dusted with frost, and the breath that left him came out white and slow. He looked inside one more time. The hearth was cold, dark, and gray, like everything else these days. His mother's knitted shawl still lay over the back of the rocking chair. His younger sister's rag doll sat on the floor where she had dropped it the night she took sick. The final week had been a blur, running between them, boiling water, begging the fire to burn hotter. It wasn't enough. The fever took them one by one, and when the doctor finally made it through the snow, it was too late. He could have buried them days ago, but he had put it off, partly hoping to wake from a bad dream, partly because he could not stand the thought. But now the ground had softened enough for a grave to be dug, and the time for denial was over. He walked outside and knelt beside 3 wooden mounds covered with the first hints of spring grass. He'd placed stones at the head of each one. It was all he could manage. Words of prayer stuck in his throat, so he said nothing at all. His father had always told him that God knew a man's thoughts even when he had no voice to speak them. The wind changed direction, bringing with it the smell of mud and thawed earth, the smell of things ending and beginning all at once. Elias stood slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. He looked over the wide fields of his family's land, the barren rows and the empty barn, and he knew something with final certainty. There was nothing here left for him. Not in the fields, not in the house, not in the graves. The gold rush stories had seemed like tall tales when he was younger, wild promises of rivers glittering with flakes of gold, of mountains with riches tucked inside them like God's own treasure chests. But he'd also heard the truth beneath the exaggerations. People really were striking it rich. Men who had been nobodies with nothing but a pan and luck were coming back with enough gold to buy land, raise barns, start towns. And his father had once dreamed of owning a tavern, something small, sturdy, filled with the smell of oak and pipe smoke and stew, a place where travelers stopped to rest and talk. He had talked of it often when Elias was a boy, describing the counter he wanted to build, the tables he'd carve, the stories he'd hear. He always said a tavern was more than a business. It was a warm place in a cold world. Elias had promised him, back then, that he would help build it someday. But someday had never arrived. So now, with the weight of grief sitting like stone in his stomach, Elias made a decision. If there was even a fraction of truth to the tales from the West, if there was even a chance of making enough money to build that tavern in his father's memory, Then he had to try. He'd rather die on the trail than die standing still in a place that had already taken everyone he loved. He went inside and packed what little he had left: a couple shirts, his father's old revolver, a Bible with loose pages, a small tin cup, a blanket rolled tight and bound with twine, a hunting knife, the last loaf of bread, hard as stone but still edible if he was desperate, and the few dollars he had managed to hide from the winter thieves who had prowled the countryside, scavenging from dying farms. By midday, he was walking down the dirt path toward the main road, his pack slung over one shoulder, his hat pulled low. He didn't look back until he reached the edge of the property, just far enough for the house to look small and fragile, like a toy someone had forgotten in a field. He whispered goodbye to no one in particular and stepped onto the road heading west. The first miles were the hardest, not because of the terrain, but because of the silence. Elias had never been alone for long in his life. He'd had a family, neighbors, a church gathering on Sundays, but now all he heard was the scrape of his boots and the cawing of blackbirds overhead. He tried humming once or twice, but the sound felt strange, like it didn't belong in the cold morning air. As he walked, the landscape slowly changed. The oak trees thinned. The hills grew wider and more barren. The farms became fewer and farther between. Once, years ago, this road had been full of farmers taking goods to market. Now it carried travelers heading west, alone, in small groups, some on foot, some with wagons piled high with belongings. He passed a family heading the same direction, their wagon drawn by two tired-looking oxen. The father nodded politely. The mother smiled wearily from beneath her bonnet. A little boy waved at Elias with a stick, pretending it was a sword. Elias nodded back, warmed for a moment by the simple human contact. Later, he passed two men on horseback riding fast. They barely looked at him. He wondered if they were gold seekers too, or if they were the kind of men who took advantage of the desperate. Highwaymen, or worse. He kept walking. Nights were cold and long. He slept beneath trees or inside shallow ditches to cut the wind. His blanket was thin, and more than once he woke shivering hard. He rationed his bread and cold beans carefully, telling himself he needed to make it to the next settlement before hunger made him foolish. A week into his journey, he stopped at a small trading post crouched near a river crossing. It wasn't much, just a wooden storefront, a paddock for horses, and a fire pit, but it felt like the grandest thing he had seen in weeks. Inside, the place was warm, the fire crackling. The shelves were stocked with dry goods, tools, and supplies for travelers. The trader, a stout woman with sharp eyes, looked him over. "You headin' west?" she asked bluntly. "I am." "Got money?" "A little." "You'll need more than a little. This ain't a gentle road." Elias nodded, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "I know." She sighed, as if she had heard this 1,000 times. "Well, I got jerky, hardtack, matches, a water skin, and wool socks. You'll want all of 'em if you got sense." He bought what he could afford, which wasn't much. When he stepped back outside, his pack felt heavier, but his pockets were nearly empty. That night, he slept by the river, the stars bright and sharp above him. The rush of water soothed him, even if his thoughts did not. He kept thinking of his father, how he'd stand on the porch, smoking his pipe, watching the fields with a calm expression. He wondered what his father would think of this journey. Would he see it as foolish, brave, or just necessary? Elias clung to the last thought. Necessary. Everything else was noise. The following days blurred together. Long stretches of dusty road, new faces, changing skies. Spring warmed the earth, and the frozen nights gave way to gentler ones. Flowers appeared along the ditches, and the world felt like it was waking up again, even if Elias himself was still half asleep with grief most mornings. One afternoon, he stopped by a camp of travelers sharing stew over a fire. They invited him to join. He accepted gratefully. The group was made up of 5 men and 2 women, all heading to the same place, California. Their leader was a broad-shouldered man with gray streaks in his beard and a calm voice. His name was Samuel Briggs. Briggs asked Elias where he was headed. "West," Elias said. "I'm hoping to try my luck in the gold fields." "Most men are," Briggs replied. "Some will find it. Some won't. Most will lose more than they gain." "You heading that way too?" Elias asked. "Aye, we are," Briggs said, stirring the pot of stew. "But we move careful. We've had trouble already. Indian territory ahead is tense. Some tribes are peaceful, some not so much." Elias listened quietly. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but he felt a heaviness in his stomach. Briggs studied him a moment. "You got family waiting for you out there?" "No," Elias said softly. "No one left." Briggs nodded, understanding without prying further. "Well, if you walk with us a while, you'll have company at least. This road is too big for one set of boots." Elias hesitated. He hadn't intended to join a group, but the truth was he was tired of silence, tired of being alone with his grief, and Briggs seemed honest, steady, the kind of man others naturally followed. Elias nodded. "Thank you," he said. "I'd be glad for the company." "Good," Briggs said. "Get some stew before it's gone, and get used to early mornings. We move before the sun." Traveling with the group changed everything. They shared stories around the fire. Funny ones, sad ones, lies dressed as truths. They divided chores. The older women taught Elias how to mend one of his shirts, and in return he chopped wood, fetched water, and helped patch a torn wagon wheel. For the first time in months, Elias felt something faint and unfamiliar: companionship. Briggs walked beside him often, talking about the land ahead, the dangers, and the promise of gold. He had been west before, years ago, working as a trapper and scout. He knew trails, shortcuts, rivers. He knew things Elias didn't even know he needed to know. "Don't ever trust mountains," Briggs said one morning as they climbed into a range of steep foothills. "They look like stone, but they move underfoot. Same with the men who hide in them." Elias smiled faintly. "And the gold?" Briggs chuckled. "Now that, son, is the trickiest of all. Gold will make a man rich or make him mad. Sometimes both." The days passed easier in good company, but the warnings Briggs had given soon proved true. One night, as they passed through a valley marked by tall grass and scattered pines, Briggs ordered double watch. He said he felt eyes in the hills. Elias didn't sleep well. Every crack of a twig made him grip his father's revolver tighter. Before dawn, the attack came. A war cry split the air, sharp and echoing. Figures burst from the tree line, fast, silent until the moment they descended. The wagons jolted with movement. Horses screamed. Someone yelled for everyone to get down. Elias ducked behind a wagon wheel. Arrows thudded into the wood inches from his head. Briggs roared orders, firing his rifle into the shadows where the attackers moved like smoke. The fighting lasted minutes, but it felt like hours. When the warriors retreated back into the trees, leaving behind only silence and fear, the group was shaken but alive. All except one. Samuel Briggs had taken an arrow deep in the side during the attack. Even as he brushed off help and insisted he was fine, the blood soaking his shirt said otherwise. They cleaned the wound as best they could and kept moving. But by the second day, Briggs could barely stand. By the third, fever had him shaken like a leaf in the wind. Elias sat with him that night. The leader's breathing was ragged, his skin hot. "You're gonna make it," Elias said quietly. Briggs smiled weakly. "Son, you're a good man, but you don't know false hope when you hear it." Elias swallowed hard. Briggs took his hand. "Listen, West is dangerous. Keep moving. Trust your gut. And remember, gold's worth nothing if it costs you your soul." Elias nodded, eyes stinging. By dawn, Samuel Briggs was gone. The caravan buried him beside a lone cedar tree overlooking the valley. The wind whispered through the branches, and Elias thought briefly of the graves back home. He hadn't known Briggs long, but the loss cut deeper than he expected. As the group stood around the fresh mound of earth, their faces pale and tired, Elias realized something else. He might lose more people on this journey. He might lose everything. But the only way was forward. The West didn't wait for the broken-hearted. And so, with Briggs's warnings echoing in his mind, Elias tightened the straps of his pack, adjusted his hat, and stepped back onto the long road west, toward danger, fortune, and whatever fate had in store. Absolutely. Here is Chapter 2, written in the same tone and style as Chapter 1, at approximately 2,000 words. Chapter 2, The Long Road West. Approximately 2,000 words. The morning after Samuel Briggs's burial was colder than any morning Elias could remember. Not the deep winter cold he had known back home, but a hard, metallic cold that seeped into his thoughts as much as his bones. The sky was pale, the sun just a timid circle behind a sheet of thin clouds. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. The group moved slowly, subdued. No one talked much as they packed their things. Every man and woman seemed to walk a little heavier than the day before, like Briggs's death had settled on their shoulders as extra weight. Elias buckled the straps of his pack and looked up at the cedar tree where Briggs was buried. The wind stirred its branches as if giving a last farewell. He wondered how many more graves he'd pass before this journey ended. How many more names he would have to remember. How many more stories would begin and end on this unforgiven trail. "Ready, son?" one of the older men asked, leading an ox back to the wagon. Elias nodded. Ready? But the truth was, he didn't feel ready at all. They set out just after sunrise. Without Briggs to lead them, the caravan felt fractured. Decisions were slower, confidence thinner. Two of the families decided to break off, claiming they preferred to travel south and take their chances away from the hills. Elias couldn't blame them. The night attack still echoed vividly in his mind. The war cry, the sound of arrows, the way fear had frozen him to the bone. The farther he could get from that terror, the better. The remaining group pushed forward, following the wide dirt trail that hundreds, maybe thousands, had traveled before them in search of gold wagon wheels carved deep grooves in the dried mud. Footprints layered over one another like ghosts of previous travelers. Every sign reminded Elias that he was not the first man to make this journey, and certainly not the last. By midday, the sun had finally emerged. Its warmth felt welcome, almost comforting. Elias walked beside the lead wagon, his shoulders aching from the weight of his pack. He didn't complain. Everyone was hurting in their own ways. The trail wound through rolling hills that seemed endless. Every crest promised a view, and every view revealed still more land stretching west. It was difficult not to feel small. Elias had lived his whole life on a modest plot of farmland. Now the world seemed bigger than he had ever imagined, vast, demanding, wild. "You holding up all right?" asked Miss Alden, one of the two women traveling alone. She had a kind face, lined from years of sun and worry. Her voice was steady, like the kind people leaned on in times like these. "I'm fine," Elias said. "Briggs liked you," she said you had sense. Not many young men do." Elias looked at the horizon. "I didn't know him long." "Sometimes that's enough," she replied. As the afternoon waned, they reached a shallow river crossing. The water ran fast but not deep. The wagon wheels splashed through, and the oxen strained against the current. Elias helped steady the youngest boy in the group as he crossed on foot. The water was icy, biting at his skin. When they reached the other side, he knelt and cupped his hands to drink. The water tasted cold, clean, alive. "Drink slow," Miss Alden warned. "Long days make men drink too fast and regret it later." Elias nodded, letting the water drip between his fingers before sipping again. The group stopped on the western bank to eat. Hardtack, salted pork, cold beans, meals meant for survival, not enjoyment. Elias sat with his back against a rock, chewing slowly. He closed his eyes and let the sun warm his face. It felt almost peaceful, almost normal. Almost. He opened his eyes when he heard footsteps. It was Briggs's friend, a quiet man named Vernon Tate. He had spoken perhaps 10 sentences since Elias met him, but now he stopped and looked down. "We're heading into open plains tomorrow," Vernon said, voice low and gravelly. "Long stretch, no trees, no cover, hard on wagons, hard on men." Elias nodded. "How long to cross?" 3 days, Vernon said. 4 if weather turns, 5 if someone slows us down." He paused, rubbing his beard. "Briggs would have known the safest route. Without him, we follow the trail and hope it stays kind." Elias swallowed. "Is it dangerous?" Vernon's eyes softened, almost pitying. "Son, everything west of here is dangerous." Then he walked away, leaving Elias to ponder the words. That night, they camped in a small valley sheltered by low hills. They lit a fire, careful to keep it small. None of them wanted attention. Elias helped gather wood with another young man named Will, who had traveled with Briggs for years and still wore grief heavily. Will broke a stick in half over his knee. "Sam once told me," he said, tossing the pieces into the fire pit, "a man who travels west is either running from something or running towards something." "And you?" Elias asked softly. "Which are you?" Will stared at the flames licking up from the kindle. "Both," he answered. Elias felt the truth in the statement. He was running from the memories of his family, their empty house, the graves, but he was also running toward something: gold, fortune, hope, a future he could actually build. They cooked beans over the fire. The smell filled the camp. Elias listened to the soft crackle of burning wood, the shifting of wagons, the low murmur of tired voices. It struck him then how different life felt away from the farm. Everything was unstable, temporary. Decisions were made at sunrise and forgotten by sunset. The road offered no guarantees. He lay under the stars, no clouds to block them. The sky felt impossibly high. He counted the constellations he remembered from childhood, trying to find comfort in something that had not changed since the world began. He drifted to sleep, thinking about his father's voice, deep and warm, telling him stories by the hearth. Stories about men who chased dreams out west. Stories about risk and loss, and the courage it took to follow hope into the unknown. Elias slept well for the first time in days. The next morning came early, as Vernon predicted. The sun had barely touched the horizon when the group set out, heading for the open plains. Within hours, the land changed. Trees vanished. Hills flattened. The world became a wide, sweeping sea of golden grass and endless sky. There was no shade, no shelter, nothing but the wagon, the wind, and their own footsteps. Elias quickly realized how tiring it was to walk without broken terrain to rest the eyes on. The constant monotony of the plains made time feel strange. Hours felt like days. Miles felt like dozens. The horizon never seemed to get closer. The oxen slowed. Dust clung to everything: clothes, hair, skin. Elias drank sparingly, remembering Miss Alden's warning. The sun beat down without mercy, and sweat pooled in his collar. Will walked beside him. "Feels like the whole world's holding its breath out here," Will said. "Feels like the world forgot to put anything down at all," Elias replied. Will laughed, a dry sound. "Ain't that the truth?" Around noon, they stopped under the only bit of shade they could find. A lone boulder jutting from the ground like God dropped it by mistake. It offered enough cover for 3 people if they squeezed together. Everyone else sat in the grass, hats pulled low. Elias took out a scrap of bread and chewed slowly. His jaw ached from the hardness. Miss Alden fanned herself with her bonnet. "This land wasn't meant for people," she said. "Then why so many coming this way?" Elias asked. "Desperation," she answered. "Hope. Maybe they're the same thing." The plains stretched into a second day, then a third. Their water ran low. Rations thinned. One of the oxen began limping badly, slowing the group down. Vernon examined the animal and shook his head. "We push him. He'll drop," he said. "So what do we do?" Will asked. "Rest a day?" Miss Alden pursed her lips. "We can't afford to rest." "And we can't afford to lose an ox," Vernon countered. Voices rose. Tempers shortened. The heat made everything worse. Elias stepped back from the argument, letting the older ones sort it out. He instead refilled water skins from the faint trickle of a nearby stream, a blessing they had stumbled upon, one that might have saved their lives. As he dipped the skins into the water, he felt something shift inside him. Responsibility, that sense that he needed to contribute, to do more than simply follow. Briggs would have kept this group grounded. Now, the group needed someone else to step up. Elias was young, too young, probably, but youth didn't matter much on the trail. A man either helped the group survive or he didn't. When he returned with filled skins, the argument had cooled. Vernon nodded to him. "Good work," the older man said. Elias felt pride rise in his chest. That night, the plains gave them a sunset like a painting, deep oranges bleeding into purple, clouds glowing like embers. The group gathered around the fire, exhaustion etched into their faces but relief softening the edges. Elias sat beside Will again. They ate quietly for a long while before Will spoke. "Sam thought you had something in you," he said. "Said you walked like a man who could carry weight." Elias looked at him, startled. "He said that?" "He did." Elias felt his throat tighten. "I wish he were still here." "Me too," Will said, "but we gotta keep moving. He'd haunt us if we didn't." Elias chuckled softly. The fire crackled. The sky deepened. "Will?" Elias asked. "Yeah? Have you ever wondered what you'll do when you find gold?" Will shrugged. "Buy land, build something, maybe a shop, maybe nothing. Hard to dream big when you're trying to stay alive day by day." Elias nodded slowly. "My father wanted a tavern," he said. "Something small, something warm." Will gave him a thoughtful look. "You gonna build it?" "If I can," Elias answered quietly. Will smiled. "Then you will." On the fourth morning, the plains finally broke. Trees returned. Hills rose. Water became clearer. The land began to feel alive again. Elias breathed deeper, grateful. But before they were fully out of the plains, trouble found them again. This time, not from warriors in the hills, but from men who walked on two legs with greedy eyes and gun belts heavy on their hips. Bandits. 3 of them rode out of the brush as the group skirted a small ravine. They weren't subtle. They weren't hiding. "Mornin', folks," the leader said, tipping his hat. His smile was all teeth. "Reckon you've been on a long journey. Roads like these make a man vulnerable." Elias's stomach tightened. Vernon stepped forward, rifle in hand. "We don't want trouble." "Neither do we," the bandit replied. "But we do want supplies, food, water, anything shiny." Will muttered under his breath, "Damn vultures." The standoff stretched thin and dangerous. Elias felt his heart beat in his throat. Before anything could explode, Miss Alden stepped between them. "You take our food, we starve," she said plainly. "You take our water, we die. You want to kill us? Or you want to be men who show mercy?" The bandit leader raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, mercy's expensive." "And so are bullets," she answered. The man laughed, a sharp, surprised sound. "Fair enough," he said. "We'll take just a little. A gift, let's call it." They lost some food, a water skin, and a pair of boots, but kept their lives. As the bandits rode off, Vernon murmured, "Briggs would have handled that quicker." Elias felt the weight of the words. The road west was only going to get harder, and he was starting to understand just how dangerous, how unpredictable, how merciless the journey could be. But the next town was close. Maybe hope would be waiting there, maybe not. Either way, Elias kept walking west, step after step, mile after mile, toward the fortune he desperately needed and the future he still wasn't sure he deserved. The morning after Samuel Briggs's burial was colder than any morning Elias could remember. Not the deep winter cold he had known back home, but a hard, metallic cold that seeped into his thoughts as much as his bones. The sky was pale, the sun just a timid circle behind a sheet of thin clouds. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. The group moved slowly, subdued. No one talked much as they packed their things. Every man and woman seemed to walk a little heavier than the day before, like Briggs's death had settled on their shoulders as extra weight. Elias buckled the straps of his pack and looked up at the cedar tree where Briggs was buried. The wind stirred its branches as if giving a last farewell. He wondered how many more graves he'd pass before this journey ended. How many more names he would have to remember. How many more stories would begin and end on this unforgiven trail. "Ready, son?" one of the older men asked, leading an ox back to the wagon. Elias nodded. Ready. But the truth was, he didn't feel ready at all. They set out just after sunrise. Without Briggs to lead them, the caravan felt fractured. Decisions were slower, confidence thinner. Two of the families decided to break off, claiming they preferred to travel south and take their chances away from the hills. Elias couldn't blame them. The night attack still echoed vividly in his mind. The war cry, the sound of arrows, the way fear had frozen him to the bone. The farther he could get from that terror, the better. The remaining group pushed forward, following the wide dirt trail that hundreds, maybe thousands, had traveled before them in search of gold wagon wheels carved deep grooves in the dried mud. Footprints layered over one another like ghosts of previous travelers. Every sign reminded Elias that he was not the first man to make this journey, and certainly not the last. By midday, the sun had finally emerged. Its warmth felt welcome, almost comforting. Elias walked beside the lead wagon, his shoulders aching from the weight of his pack. He didn't complain. Everyone was hurting in their own ways. The trail wound through rolling hills that seemed endless. Every crest promised a view, and every view revealed still more land stretching west. It was difficult not to feel small. Elias had lived his whole life on a modest plot of farmland. Now the world seemed bigger than he had ever imagined. Vast, demanding, wild. "You holding up all right?" asked Miss Alden, one of the two women traveling alone. She had a kind face, lined from years of sun and worry. Her voice was steady, like the kind people leaned on in times like these. "I'm fine," Elias said. "Briggs liked you," she said. "Said you had sense. Not many young men do." Elias looked at the horizon. "I didn't know him long." "Sometimes that's enough," she replied. As the afternoon waned, they reached a shallow river crossing. The water ran fast but not deep. The wagon wheels splashed through, and the oxen strained against the current, Elias helped steady the youngest boy in the group as he crossed on foot. The water was icy, biting at his skin. When they reached the other side, he knelt and cupped his hands to drink. The water tasted cold, clean, alive. "Drink slow," Miss Alden warned. "Long days make men drink too fast and regret it later." Elias nodded, letting the water drip between his fingers before sipping again. The group stopped on the western bank to eat. Hardtack, salted pork, cold beans, meals meant for survival, not enjoyment. Elias sat with his back against a rock, chewing slowly. He closed his eyes and let the sun warm his face. It felt almost peaceful, almost normal. Almost. He opened his eyes when he heard footsteps. It was Briggs's friend, a quiet man named Vernon Tate. He had spoken perhaps 10 sentences since Elias met him, but now he stopped and looked down. "We're heading into open plains tomorrow," Vernon said, voice low and gravelly. "Long stretch, no trees, no cover, hard on wagons, hard on men." Elias nodded. "How long to cross?" 3 days, Vernon said. 4 if weather turns. 5 if someone slows us down." He paused, rubbing his beard. "Briggs would have known the safest route. Without him, we follow the trail and hope it stays kind." Elias swallowed. "Is it dangerous?" Vernon's eyes softened, almost pitying. "Son, everything west of here is dangerous." Then he walked away, leaving Elias to ponder the words. That night, they camped in a small valley sheltered by low hills. They lit a fire, careful to keep it small. None of them wanted attention. Elias helped gather wood with another young man named Will, who had traveled with Briggs for years and still wore grief heavily. Will broke a stick in half over his knee. "Sam once told me," he said, tossing the pieces into the fire pit, "a man who travels west is either running from something or running toward something." "And you?" Elias asked softly. "Which are you?" Will stared at the flames licking up from the kindle. "Both," he answered. Elias felt the truth in the statement. He was running from the memories of his family, their empty house, the graves, but he was also running toward something: gold, fortune, hope, a future he could actually build. They cooked beans over the fire. The smell filled the camp. Elias listened to the soft crackle of burning wood, the shifting of wagons, the low murmur of tired voices. It struck him then how different life felt away from the farm. Everything was unstable, temporary. Decisions were made at sunrise and forgotten by sunset. The road offered no guarantees. He lay under the stars, no clouds to block them. The sky felt impossibly high. He counted the constellations he remembered from childhood, trying to find comfort in something that had not changed since the world began. He drifted to sleep, thinking about his father's voice, deep and warm, telling him stories by the hearth. Stories about men who chased dreams out west. Stories about risk and loss and the courage it took to follow hope into the unknown. Elias slept well for the first time in days. The next morning came early, as Vernon predicted. The sun had barely touched the horizon when the group set out, heading for the open plains. Within hours, the land changed. Trees vanished. Hills flattened. The world became a wide, sweeping sea of golden grass and endless sky. There was no shade, no shelter, nothing but the wagon, the wind, and their own footsteps. Elias quickly realized how tiring it was to walk without broken terrain to rest the eyes on. The constant monotony of the plains made time feel strange. Hours felt like days. Miles felt like dozens. The horizon never seemed to get closer. The oxen slowed. Dust clung to everything: clothes, hair, skin. Elias drank sparingly, remembering Miss Alden's warning. The sun beat down without mercy, and sweat pooled in his collar. Will walked beside him. "Feels like the whole world's holding its breath out here," Will said. "Feels like the world forgot to put anything down at all," Elias replied. Will laughed, a dry sound. "Ain't that the truth?" Around noon, they stopped under the only bit of shade they could find, a lone boulder jutting from the ground like God dropped it by mistake. It offered enough cover for 3 people if they squeezed together. Everyone else sat in the grass, hats pulled low. Elias took out a scrap of bread and chewed slowly. His jaw ached from the hardness. Miss Alden fanned herself with her bonnet. "This land wasn't meant for people," she said. "Then why so many coming this way?" Elias asked. "Desperation," she answered. "Hope. Maybe they're the same thing." The plains stretched into a second day, then a third. Their water ran low, rations thinned. One of the oxen began limping badly, slowing the group down. Vernon examined the animal and shook his head. "We push him, he'll drop," he said. "So what do we do?" Will asked. "Rest a day." Miss Alden pursed her lips. "We can't afford to rest." "And we can't afford to lose an ox," Vernon countered. Voices rose, tempers shortened. The heat made everything worse. Elias stepped back from the argument, letting the older ones sort it out. He instead refilled water skins from the faint trickle of a nearby stream. A blessing they had stumbled upon, one that might have saved their lives. As he dipped the skins into the water, he felt something shift inside him. Responsibility. That sense that he needed to contribute, to do more than simply follow. Briggs would have kept this group grounded. Now the group needed someone else to step up. Elias was young, too young, probably, but youth didn't matter much on the trail. A man either helped the group survive or he didn't. When he returned with filled skins, the argument had cooled. Vernon nodded to him. "Good work," the older man said. Elias felt pride rise in his chest. That night, the plains gave them a sunset like a painting, deep oranges bleeding into purple, clouds glowing like embers. The group gathered around the fire, exhaustion etched into their faces but relief softening the edges. Elias sat beside Will again. They ate quietly for a long while before Will spoke. "Sam thought you had something in you," he said. "Said you walked like a man who could carry weight." Elias looked at him, startled. "He said that?" "He did." Elias felt his throat tighten. "I wish he were still here." "Me too," Will said. "But we gotta keep moving. He'd haunt us if we didn't." Elias chuckled softly. The fire crackled, the sky deepened. "Will?" Elias asked. "Yeah? Have you ever wondered what you'll do when you find gold?" Will shrugged. "Buy land. Build something. Maybe a shop. Maybe nothing. Hard to dream big when you're trying to stay alive day by day. Elias nodded slowly. My father wanted a tavern, he said. Something small, something warm. Will gave him a thoughtful look. You gonna build it? If I can, Elias answered quietly. Will smiled. Then you will. On the fourth morning, the plains finally broke. Trees returned. Hills rose. Water became clearer. The land began to feel alive again. Elias breathed deeper, grateful. But before they were fully out of the plains, trouble found them again. This time, not from warriors in the hills, but from men who walked on two legs with greedy eyes and gun belts heavy on their hips. Bandits. 3 of them rode out of the brush as the group skirted a small ravine. They weren't subtle. They weren't hiding. "Mornin', folks," the leader said, tipping his hat. His smile was all teeth. "Reckon you've been on a long journey. Roads like these make a man vulnerable." Elias's stomach tightened. Vernon stepped forward, rifle in hand. "We don't want trouble." "Neither do we," the bandit replied. "But we do want supplies. Food, water, anything shiny." Will muttered under his breath, "Damn vultures." The standoff stretched thin and dangerous. Elias felt his heart beat in his throat. Before anything could explode, Miss Alden stepped between them. "You take our food, we starve," she said plainly. "You take our water, we die. You want to kill us, or you want to be men who show mercy?" The bandit leader raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, mercy's expensive." "And so are bullets," she answered. The man laughed, a sharp, surprised sound. "Fair enough," he said. "We'll take just a little. A gift, let's call it." They lost some food, a water skin, and a pair of boots, but kept their lives. As the bandits rode off, Vernon murmured, "Briggs would have handled that quicker." Elias felt the weight of the words. The road west was only going to get harder, and he was starting to understand just how dangerous, how unpredictable, how merciless the journey could be. But the next town was close. Maybe hope would be waiting there. Maybe not. Either way, Elias kept walking west, step after step, mile after mile, toward the fortune he desperately needed and the future he still wasn't sure he deserved. After the meal, Elias stepped outside to get air. The moon hung low between the pine trees, and the night smelled of damp wood and smoke. He stood there a long while, staring into the darkness. He heard the door creak and Grady's soft footsteps behind him. "You look like a man with something heavy on his mind," Grady said. Elias didn't turn. "I'm leaving them tomorrow." Grady puffed his pipe. "Thought as much." "They keep getting hurt," Elias said quietly. "Everyone who travels with me ends up bleeding or dead." Grady snorted. "Son, everyone who travels west ends up bleeding eventually. This ain't about curses or bad luck. It's about the West being meaner than you are." Elias clenched his jaw. "Maybe I should just give up." Grady walked around to face him, his old boots crunching in the leaves. "You think your family wanted you to lie down and die? You think that caravan leader, Briggs, wasn't it? You think he'd want you quitting now?" Elias's eyes stung. He looked away. Grady softened. "Boy, I buried more friends than I can count, and for every grave I kept walking. That's all a man can do out here." Elias whispered, "I don't know where to go." Grady smiled. "Good. Men who know exactly where they're going tend to walk straight into trouble. You? You're lost. Lost men survive longer. They pay attention." Elias huffed a tired laugh despite himself. Grady tapped his pipe and pointed toward the back of the cabin. "Come with me." A gift at dawn. Grady led Elias behind the cabin. The morning sun had just begun tinting the treetops gold. Birds called in the distance. The air was cool and gentle, as if the land itself was giving Elias a moment of peace before deciding his fate again. Behind the cabin stood a small fenced pen. Inside the pen, chewing lazily on a patch of grass, was the most stubborn-looking donkey Elias had ever seen. It was shaggy, gray, lopsided, and gave Elias an unimpressed stare. "This here's Pip," Grady said proudly. "Pip?" Elias repeated. "Short for pain in the posterior," Grady clarified. "Smartest animal I ever owned." Pip flicked an ear, unimpressed by the compliment. Elias frowned. "Why are you showing me a donkey?" "Because," Grady said, turning to him, "she's yours now." Elias's breath caught. "What? No, I can't take your animal." "Like hell you can't. I ain't walking west again, and Pip's wasted on hunting duty. You? You're heading into the mountains, and you need more than boots." Grady shoved an old leather pack into Elias's hands. Inside were a battered pickaxe, a tin pan, a coil of rope, a small hatchet, a flint striker, 2 wool blankets, and a battered water skin patched in 3 places. "These tools," Grady said, "are older than you, and they've found more gold than most men ever will." Elias shook his head. "I have nothing to pay you with." Grady shrugged. "Then don't pay me. Just don't waste your chance." Elias swallowed hard. He felt his throat tighten. "Why me?" Grady smiled sadly. "Because you remind me of myself when I was your age. Too thin, too stubborn, too haunted. You got fire in you. Fire finds gold." For the first time since his family died, Elias felt warmth spread through his chest that wasn't from the sun or the fire. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me," Grady said, swinging the pen gate open. "Thank old Pip here. She's a real hero." Pip brayed loudly, as if protesting the burden of becoming anyone's hero. Goodbyes. Elias packed his new gear slowly, methodically. Miss Alden watched him with sorrow in her eyes. "You're leaving us," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "I have to." She stepped forward and squeezed his hands. "You are not cursed, Elias Carter. The world is simply cruel." "Maybe," he murmured. Will embraced him roughly. "If you ever make it rich, promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't turn into one of them men who forget their friends." Elias nodded. "I won't." Vernon, gruff as always, simply said, "Keep your powder dry." Then he stepped back and wiped his eyes when he thought Elias wasn't looking. Elias tied Pip's rope to his belt. The donkey tugged stubbornly. "Yeah, I know," Elias muttered. "I don't like this either." Grady cackled through the cabin window. "You'll get used to her." Into the mountains. Elias faced west. The mountains rose in the distance, jagged and blue, their peaks shrouded in early morning mist. They looked cold, dangerous, impossible, but they also looked like hope. Elias took his first step. Pip dragged her hooves dramatically, then decided to follow. Elias didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had nothing behind him anymore. Only the long, brutal, beautiful promise of the west ahead. The land didn't turn to mountains all at once. It rose slowly, like a great beast waking from sleep. At first, it was just longer hills and steeper creek beds. Then the trees grew taller, the air thinned, and the wind sharpened. The sky felt closer somehow, bluer and wider and edged with peaks that cut into it like jagged teeth. Elias Carter walked into it with a stubborn little donkey at his side and a pack that seemed to get heavier every hour. Pip did not approve of the journey. She dragged her hooves at every incline, stopped to sniff every bush, and considered every fallen log a personal insult. She made her feelings known with sharp, indignant brays that echoed off the rocks. "Come on, Pip," Elias muttered, tugging the rope. "You heard Grady. There's gold up here." Pip glared at him with large, unimpressed eyes and refused to move. Elias sighed and scratched behind her ear. "You know, you're supposed to be the sturdy, mountain-climbing type." Pip flicked an ear, then finally relented and plodded forward, hooves clopping over stone. The first few days were nothing but climbing. Elias followed narrow game trails along ridges and through stands of pine that whispered when the wind passed through them. The higher he went, the colder it became. Nights bit through his blankets like teeth. Frost silvered the grass at dawn, crunching under his boots. He learned to make small fires carefully hidden between rocks so they wouldn't catch the forest's attention. Grady's flint striker sparked true, and the old man's blankets, though worn, kept him from freezing outright. Food was harder. He snared rabbits when he could, fished in cold creeks with a bit of twisted line and bent hook. Sometimes he ate nothing but a strip of jerky and melted snow. Other times he went to sleep with his stomach gnawing at itself, reminding him that dreams of gold weighed nothing on an empty belly. Still, each morning he rose and pushed higher. "You're insane, you know that?" he told Pip one afternoon as they scrambled up a rocky incline. Pip snorted. "Fine, I'm insane. You're just guilty by association." He might have turned back if not for two things: his father's voice and Grady's. His father's voice came at night when the fire burned low and the trees loomed overhead like giants. Elias would close his eyes and hear him describing the tavern he'd wanted: a long oak counter, a stone hearth, benches smoothed by years of use, a place where men could sit and forget the world for a while. Always wanted a place where no one felt alone, his father had said once. Elias clung to that. Grady's voice came in flashes during the day, whenever doubt sank its teeth into him. "Gold's not found by men who stop when it gets hard," Grady had said. "It's found by the ones who keep walking long after their legs say no." So Elias kept walking. On the 5th day in the high country, the weather turned. Clouds rolled over the peaks and spilled down into the valleys like thick smoke. The temperature dropped in a way that made Elias's breath come out in the sharp, white bursts. Wind howled through the pines, bending their tops like supplicants bowing to something larger than themselves. Snow came next. Fine, biting flakes at first, then thicker, heavier ones that clung to his coat and hat. Pip did not approve of this either. "Don't you start," Elias said through chattering teeth. "I didn't ask for snow either." He found shelter under an overhanging rock shelf. It wasn't much, but it blocked the worst of the wind. He built a fire from damp wood and cursed until it finally caught. Smoke stinging his eyes, Pip huddled close, occasionally nudging his shoulder as if to check he was still alive. Elias wrapped himself tightly in the blankets and watched the snow swirl outside. "This is madness," he muttered to himself. "Men die up here. They vanish. They become stories and warnings." The fire crackled. Snow gathered at the edge of the rock shelf in slow, soft piles. "I could turn around," he thought. He pictured the road back, down the mountains, back to Grady's cabin, back to Fort Wilton, back to... what, exactly? Empty states with crowded towns, farms already claimed, a life of scraping by and watching other men own everything worth owning. He exhaled slowly. Number. He hadn't come this far to quit at a little snow. "Get some rest, Pip," he whispered. "Tomorrow we go higher." Pip made a low sound that might have been a groan, or agreement. Elias decided to believe it was agreement. The storm passed in the night. Morning revealed a world remade. Snow dusted every branch, every rock, every fallen log. The mountains glowed in the early sun, white and gold and sharp against the cobalt sky. Elias stepped out from under the rock shelf and felt, despite his aches and hunger, a weird kind of gratitude. For a moment, the world was quiet. Holy, even. He filled his lungs with cold air until it burned. "West," he told Pip, patting her rough neck. "We go west." The next stretch of travel was slow but beautiful. The snow soon melted in patches as they descended slightly into a broad forested basin ringed with smaller ridges. A stream ran through the middle, cutting a silver line across the land. Elias stopped at the sight of it. "How about that?" he breathed. The stream wasn't large, but its water was clear, running swift over stone and gravel. Sunlight hit the surface and flashed back in little bursts of brightness. Something inside Elias stirred. Grady's words again. Look for a creek that curves, with sandbars and little pockets where the water slows. That's where heavier things, like gold, drop and settle. This stream had all of that. Pip tugged at her rope, more interested in the grass along the bank than fortune. Elias laughed under his breath. "All right, girl. You eat. I'll work." He set up a small camp in the trees above the creek. A fire ring, blankets, Pip's picket line. Then he took the tin pan from the pack and walked down to the water's edge. Kneeling, he dug his fingers into the gravel at the bend where the stream slowed. Pebbles, sand, and silt filled the pan. "Grady, if you lied to me," he murmured. He lowered the pan into the water, letting the current wash over it. He swirled it gently, watching the lighter material rise and spill over the edge. Sand and mud went first, leaving behind heavier stones. Bits of black sand gathered at the bottom, just like Grady said they would. He tilted the pan, swirled, watched. The sun glinted on the water's surface, making it hard to tell if what he saw was light or something else. For several minutes, there was nothing. Just rocks, sand, his own reflection shaken in the water. Then, something flashed at the bottom of the pan. Elias froze. He blinked, heart pounding. Slowly, carefully, he swirled again, washing away more black sand. There it was, a tiny, bright flake, no bigger than a grain of oats, but it shone in the sunlight with a color that was unmistakable. Gold. Elias stared, stunned. He let out a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. "Well, you were right, you old liar." He fished the flake out with his fingertip and slid it into a small leather pouch he'd kept for just such a possibility. His hands were shaking. He panned again. Another flake. And another. Tiny, all of them, worth almost nothing alone. But together, they were a promise, proof that this creek held something more than water and stone. Elias lost track of time. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow descent. His back ached. His fingers were numb. His knees felt like they might never straighten again. But every time he thought about stopping, he'd see another flicker of yellow in the pan, and the world narrowed down to that one color. Pip wandered along the bank, occasionally braying as if to remind him she existed. Yeah, Elias said breathlessly. "We'll eat soon. I can't stop yet." By late afternoon, the leather pouch had a noticeable weight to it. The flakes inside were still small, still the beginnings of something, not the end. But it was real. Gold. His gold. He sat back on his heels and wiped water from his face. The air felt thinner, charged, like a storm gathering, but he knew it wasn't the weather. It was him. His blood, his thoughts. Everything felt sharper, brighter, more alive. He imagined a tavern, wood warmed by lamplight, the smell of stew, a row of mugs lined neatly on a shelf, a hearth built from stones not unlike the ones in this creek, except those ones wouldn't be wet and cold, they'd be holding fire. "Pa," he whispered, "I'm going to build it. I swear it." The wind carried his words away, but he didn't care. He'd said them. That was enough. As the sun slipped toward the ridge, he finally forced himself to stop. Leaving the creek, he climbed back up to the makeshift camp. He lit a fire, roasted a rabbit he'd snared earlier, and shared small scraps with Pip. The donkey chewed thoughtfully, as if considering whether the day had been worth all the fuss. Elias held the pouch of gold in his hand, feeling its tiny weight. "It's not much yet," he told her, "but it's a start." Pip snorted and went back to her grass. Night fell slow and beautiful in the high country. The sky turned from blue to violet to deep, star-pocked black. The fire crackled softly, crickets chirped. A breeze moved through the trees with a low hiss. For the first time in a long while, Elias felt something close to peace. He lay back on his blanket, hands behind his head, and watched the stars. He thought of his family, of his mother singing by the hearth, of his sister chasing fireflies in the fields, of his father's rough, warm hand on his shoulder. "I'm doing it," he whispered to them. "I'm really doing it." A branch snapped. It was a small sound, ordinary in a forest full of life, but it broke through his thoughts like an axe through old wood. Elias sat up. The fire's light only reached so far. Beyond its glow, the trees were a wall of shadow. Pip's ears were up, eyes fixed on something in the dark. Elias's hand went slowly to his revolver. Probably a deer, he told himself, or a fox, or the wind shifting the branches. But the part of him that had survived Indian territory and robber ambushes did not believe in probably anymore. He rose quietly and stepped around the fire, peering into the black. "Hello?" he called softly. "Anyone there?" Only silence answered. No, not silence. Something else. The feeling. He'd felt it on the ridge, at Fort Wilton, in the woods when unseen eyes watched from the tree line. The sense of being measured, weighed, marked. Pip shifted nervously, hooves scraping the dirt. "All right," Elias murmured. "Easy, girl." He listened for several long moments. Nothing moved. No voice called back. No animal bolted from the brush. Still, the feeling did not fade. Eventually, he stepped back to the fire, though he did not lie down. He sat with his back to a tree where he could see both the camp and the direction the sound had come from. His revolver rested across his knees. The stars wheeled overhead. Time stretched. He saw nothing. He heard nothing else. But there, just at the edge of the firelight, where the darkness pressed in the deepest, he was almost certain he saw the faint outline of a man, just for an instant. Then it was gone. Morning found him tired but alive. The coals of the fire smoldered faintly, easy to coax back into flame. Frost clung to the grass. Pip snored softly as only a donkey could. Elias stood and stretched, his body complaining. No tracks, no broken branches beyond the camp. Nothing to prove someone had been there, but his gut told him the truth. Finding gold changed things. He wasn't just another wanderer now, not another lost soul passing through the high country. He was a man who had something worth taking. Elias looked down at the creek glinting in the early light, and then at the pouch on his belt. "You and me," he told Pip. "We're not alone up here." Pip flicked her ear, as if to say she'd known that all along. Elias tightened the straps on his gear, checked the revolver at his hip, and went back to the water to work. He would keep panning. He would keep digging. He would build his fortune, flake by tiny flake. And somewhere in the trees or on the ridges above, unseen eyes would keep watching, waiting for the moment when his gold was heavy enough, his guard low enough, and the distance to town still far enough. The West had seen men like him before, and there were always others ready to take from those who dared to find. Elias moved slowly, choosing his steps with care on the narrow, rocky paths. Pip limped beside him, favoring her wounded flank, but pushing on with the same stubbornness that had annoyed him when times were easier. Now he was grateful for it. The mountains fell away piece by piece. The air grew thicker, warmer. Snow vanished from the ground and became a distant memory clinging only to the highest peaks. Pines gave way to clusters of scrub oak and low, thorny bushes. The land began to open again, wide, rolling, with long views that made Elias feel exposed and small. He felt the bandits behind him like a shadow that stretched over miles. He didn't know how long they'd waste at the creek, chasing his scattered flakes. Maybe they'd give up early. Maybe they'd decide there wasn't enough to bother with. Maybe they'd choose to hunt easier game. But men like that didn't strike him as the give-up sort. So he moved fast. The small hidden pouch, the backup hoard, sat tucked tight inside his shirt, hanging from a leather thong around his neck. It was no longer just gold, it was his heartbeat. Every time the little bundle bumped against his chest, he remembered what it could become if he lived long enough. Wood, stone, a bar counter, a roof that didn't leak, a tavern. "Come on, Pip," he murmured as they descended a steep slope into a sunlit valley. "Every step takes us closer to a bed and a roof and people who are too busy to care who we are." Pip snorted. "Fine, and oats," he added. "Probably better oats than you've ever seen." She kept walking. The first sign of the town was not the buildings. It was the noise. After days of nothing but wind and birds and the soft clink of stones in his pan, the sound hit Elias like a wave. A low, constant hum that grew louder as he approached wagon wheels creaking, men shouting, hammers ringing on metal, a dog barking, someone laughing too hard at a joke, probably not that funny. He crested a low ridge and saw it. A mining town sprawled along the banks of a wide, muddy river. Smoke curled from dozens of chimneys. Shacks and tents tangled together on the outskirts, shoulder to shoulder with crude wooden buildings. Saloons, general stores, assay offices, smithies in the center. A larger, more solid building rose from the clutter, its front painted a faded red. A town hall, or maybe a courthouse, hard to tell from a distance. Elias stopped and just stared. He'd seen towns before, of course, but never one like this. Raw, half-built, thrumming with the kind of desperate, hungry energy that came whenever people gathered in one place to chase the same dream. Pip nudged his elbow impatiently. "Yeah," he whispered. "That's where we're headed." He squared his shoulders and walked down the slope toward it. The closer he got, the more details emerged. Men in stained shirts and muddy boots hauling sacks of ore. Women hanging laundry between tents. A child chasing a dog, both of them too thin. A man passed out in the alley beside a saloon door, hat tipped over his face. A sign swung above a wide building with bat-wing doors. The Silver Spur Saloon. Music drifted from inside. Faint, off-key piano notes, as if the instrument were as tired as the player. Laughter erupted, then died quickly, replaced by the smash of glass and a string of curses. Elias kept walking. He didn't intend to step into any saloon until he had something in his pocket that would let him walk out again. What he needed first was the place where gold stopped being a dream and became numbers on paper. The assay office. It didn't take long to find. The building sat near the center of town, a squat structure with a wide front window so coated in dust he could barely see inside. A sign above the door read, "Harker and Company Assay. Weighing, valuation, buying." Elias's heart jumped. This was it. He tied Pip's rope to a post outside, patting her neck. "Stay put. Don't bite anyone unless they really deserve it." Pip flattened her ears, which he chose to interpret as agreement. He took a breath, made sure the little pouch was secure, and stepped inside. The assay office smelled of metal, ink, and cigarette smoke. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with ledgers and leather-bound books. A large counter separated the room in half, and behind it sat a man working at a small scale with a pair of tweezers, his spectacles perched low on his nose. He was in his 50s, maybe older, with thinning hair slicked back and a mustache that tried to make up for what his scalp had lost. His vest was tidy. His shirt was clean. His eyes were sharp and calculating. "Afternoon," the man said without looking up. "If you're here to ask if the rumors are true, they are, and they ain't. There's gold. You're late. Next question." "I'm not here for rumors," Elias said, stepping closer. "I'm here to sell." That made the man look up. "Oh," he said, "then maybe my day's about to get more interesting. Name?" "Elias Carter." "Harker," the man said, tapping his chest. "My name's on the sign outside. Let's see what you've got, Mr. Carter." Elias reached inside his shirt, fingers brushing the small pouch. For a second, he hesitated. This was everything. The creaks, the cold, the hunger, the gunshots. Every choice he'd survived lay inside that bit of leather. He set it gently on the counter. Harker's expression didn't change, but his hands moved with more focus as he untied the thong and tipped the contents onto a shallow brass tray. Gold dust and tiny flakes spilled out in a soft, glittering heap. Harker whistled softly. "Well now," he murmured, "you're not as late as I thought." He spread the contents gently with the tip of a thin metal rod, separating out stray bits of stone or dirt. The flakes caught the light, throwing back a deep, rich color that needed no introduction. "Where'd you work?" Harker asked casually. "Up in the high country," Elias replied. Harker snorted. "Every fool says that. Lucky you're not a fool. This is clean, real clean." He carried the tray to the scale on his workbench, carefully calibrated with a needle that wobbled delicately as he poured the gold into a small pan. Elias watched his hands, trying not to let his anxiety show. The needle dipped, settled. Harker squinted at the markings. What does mean?" Elias asked. Harker chuckled. "Means I'm thinking. That's worth money. Relax." He opened a ledger, ran a finger down a column, then picked up a pencil and did a quick calculation, lips moving silently as he multiplied. Finally, he turned back. "All right," he said, "we've got ourselves. Call it." He named a weight and a number Elias barely processed. What he heard clearly was the conclusion. "I'll offer you this much." He wrote a figure on a scrap of paper and pushed it across the counter. Elias stared at it. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't a king's ransom. But it was more money than he had ever seen at once in his life. Enough to buy land in the right place. Enough to start something. Maybe not finished, not polished, but real. "Is that fair?" Elias asked, throat dry. Harker shrugged. "Fairer than most would give you. You can try your luck at another assay if you like, but they'll either lowball you worse or won't have enough cash on hand. I'm flush this week. Take advantage of it." "Why are you flush?" Elias asked. "Lucky streak of customers," Harker replied. "Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. They walked in with gold and walked out with paper. Some of them made it to the saloon. Some didn't make it much farther." His tone made the meaning plain. "This town ate men like bread." Harker tapped the paper again. "Well, you want it?" Elias looked at the number. He thought of going back up into the mountains, of trying again, of chasing a bigger haul and risking another bandit's bullet in his back. Then he thought of a tavern with his father's name on it. "Yes," he said, "I want it." Harker smiled. "Smart man." He swept the gold into a small cloth sack and tucked it away into a locked box beneath the counter. Then he counted out cash, neat stacks of bills and a few coins, laying them out with practiced speed. Elias watched, heart thudding. When Harker was done, he slid the money across. "There you are, Mr. Carter. Just like that, you're richer than most of the men yelling in the saloon next door." Elias picked up the money carefully, feeling its weight. Not like the weight of gold, but the weight of possibility. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. I got the better end of the bargain," Harker replied. "Now, a word of advice. Don't flash that around. Don't drink on it. Don't brag about it. This town's got more eyes than a sack of spiders." Elias nodded. "I understand." "Good," Harker said. "Then maybe you'll live long enough to spend it on something other than a coffin." Elias stepped out of the assay office into the afternoon light with his money wrapped and tucked deep inside his inner pocket. His shirt and jacket covered the bulge. To the casual eye, he looked no different now than when he'd walked in. But everything had changed. He stood still for a moment, letting the town wash around him. Voices, wagon wheels, a distant shout, a burst of laughter from the Silver Spur. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt wary. Harker's warning echoed loud in his ears, and behind that, another voice, Grady's. "Gold don't just draw dreamers, it draws wolves." He untied Pip, rubbed her muzzle. "We've got what we came for," he whispered. "Next step is not dying before we use it." She snorted, which he decided meant she agreed completely. He needed a plan. Somewhere to sleep that wasn't a ditch. Supplies for the journey eastward, toward a place where he could build something that would last somewhere smaller than this frenzy of pickaxes and whiskey and greed. He scanned the street. A small, weathered sign caught his eye down the lane. "Boarding house. Clean beds. Fair rates." Fair rates remained to be seen. Clean beds he doubted. But it was better than sleeping in the open where any drunk fool could stumble into him. He started toward it. He'd taken only a few steps when a voice stopped him cold. "Well now, look who finally crawled down out of the hills." The words slid over him like a knife laid flat against skin. No cut yet, but the promise of one. Elias turned slowly. The tall bandit from the pines stood at the far end of the street, hat low, coat dusty, a lazy smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him was the shorter bandit, no longer with a rifle in hand, but the stance said he didn't need one to cause trouble. The third, the one Elias had shot, was nowhere in sight. Maybe still bleeding up in the high country, or buried there. The tall man tapped 2 fingers against his forehead in a mock salute. "Afternoon, friend," he said. "How'd things go at the creek after we parted ways?" Elias's pulse hammered. "I moved on," he said evenly. "So we see," the shorter man said. His gaze darted toward the assay office door, then to Elias's jacket. "Man only comes out of there for one reason." Town life swirled around them, strangely unaffected. A wagon clattered past, driver oblivious. 2 men argued over a shovel handle near the general store. The world kept spinning, unconcerned that Elias's past had walked right into his present. The tall bandit, his name still unknown, took a step closer. "We had ourselves an interesting couple of days," he said. "Panning your little gift out of that creek. Weren't as much as we'd hoped. You hit any more we didn't find?" Elias said nothing. The bandit chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes." His eyes sharpened. "But here's what really interests me. You had enough left to make a trip to Harker's worthwhile, which means you're carrying more now than you ever had in your life, and you're standing in the middle of a street, surrounded by men who'd cut your throat for a handful of coins." He spread his arms as if sharing a joke. "Lucky for you, we're here." "I don't recall asking for your help," Elias said. The bandit's smile vanished. "Help?" he repeated. "No, friend. This ain't help. This is closure. You cost us time. You cost us a man. You think you walk away from that free?" The shorter man stepped to the side, blocking the gap between Elias and the boarding house. The street suddenly felt smaller. Elias's hand crept toward his revolver. The tall bandit noticed. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. "You'll get one shot. Maybe you hit me. Maybe you don't. But even if you do, my friend here's fast enough to put you down before you take a second breath." His eyes glittered. "And after that, someone will strip your corpse and spend your gold at the Silver Spur till your name's forgotten." For a moment, the world narrowed to 3 men, 1 donkey, and a stretch of dusty street. Then another voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." It was calm, firm, and carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. A man stepped out from the doorway of the building across the street, a broad-shouldered fellow in a worn coat, a badge pinned to his chest, a lawman. He carried himself with tired authority, like someone who'd seen this scene play out too many times. "Afternoon, Marshal," the tall bandit drawled. "Afternoon, Pike," the marshal replied. "Can't say I'm surprised to find you circling someone like a buzzard." So that was his name, Pike? Pike shrugged. "Just having a conversation." "Funny," the marshal said. "From where I'm standing, looks a lot like some fool thinking about drawing on a man who just came out of the assay with clean dust in his pockets." Pike's eyes narrowed. "You taking his side?" "I'm taking the side of my town," the marshal said, "which doesn't need blood in the street today. Not over your greed." He glanced at Elias. "You carrying legal funds, son?" "Yes, sir," Elias replied. "Any reason these men should have a claim on it?" "No, sir." The marshal nodded once. Then he looked back at Pike. "Then here's how this is going to go. You and your friend walk. You stay out of trouble. You leave this man alone in my jurisdiction. Or I stop looking the other way when folks mention your name with words like robbery and murder tied to it." Pike smiled thinly. "You can't hang a man on rumors, Marshal." "No," the marshal said, "but I can make your life miserable." A long silence stretched. Pike studied Elias, then the marshal, weighing the odds. He was a wolf, but wolves were smart. They didn't attack when they couldn't win. "At least tell me this," Pike said at last, tilting his head at Elias. "What's a boy like you gonna do with that gold? Drink it, gamble it, lose it in a week?" Elias met his gaze. "I'm going to build a tavern," he said, "with my father's name over the door." Pike stared at him, then laughed, hard and humorless. "You hear that?" he said to his shorter companion. He thinks he's going to turn dust into walls." He stepped back, hands raised in a mock gesture of surrender. "All right, boy," he said. "We won't paint the street with your blood. Today." He tipped his hat at the marshal. "We're law-abiding citizens, for now." With that, he turned and walked down the street. The shorter bandit followed, throwing Elias one last venomous look before disappearing around a corner. The marshal watched them go. "Coyotes," he muttered. Then he turned to Elias. "You all right, son?" Elias exhaled slowly. "Yes, sir. I think so." "Then listen close, 'cause I don't like repeating myself," the marshal said. "Those men don't forget. Pike might not draw on you in daylight with my eyes on him, but out on the trail, different story. You got your money. Good for you. Now get what you need and get out of this town. Don't linger. Don't celebrate. Don't go bragging in any saloons." "Yes, sir," Elias said again. The marshal gave a short nod. "Good. You strike me as one of the few with brains enough to still be alive in a year. Don't prove me wrong." He turned and walked away, coat flapping lightly in the wind. Elias stood in the street for a moment, feeling the tremor in his hands slowly fade. Pip nudged his shoulder as if reminding him the conversation was over and they had work to do. "You heard the man," Elias said softly. "No celebrating, no bragging. We get supplies. Then we get out." He did just that. At the general store, he bought what he truly needed and nothing more: tools, canvas, nails, a good hammer, a saw, some cooking pots, seed packets for when he found land worth planting beside his tavern. He purchased a sturdy second-hand coat and boots that didn't leak. He paid for a few nights' feed for Pip and a small sack of oats that made her whinny softly in rare happiness. Then he took a cheap small room at the boarding house for one night only. As darkness fell and the town's noise turned louder, piano music rising and falling, drunken shouts cutting through the alleys, laughter mixed with anger, Elias sat on the edge of his narrow bed with his back to the wall. He spread the remaining money out on the blanket, counting it twice, then a third time, until he knew the number by heart. It wasn't an empire, but it was enough. Enough to buy land in a growing town further east, one not yet so choked with dust and desperation. Enough to lay a foundation. Enough to build a long bar and a few sturdy tables. Enough to hang a sign with careful hands and paint on it the name that had carried him all this way: Carter's Tavern. He folded the money back into its wrap and tucked it beneath his shirt. Outside, the town shouted and sang and fought. Inside, Elias lay down, head on a thin pillow, eyes on the cracked ceiling, and let out a long breath. He had survived winter, grief, Indian territory, betrayal, bandits, mountains, and the kind of loneliness that could hollow a man out from the inside. He had found gold. He was still alive to spend it. Tomorrow, he would leave this town behind and go looking for the place where his father's dream would take root. Not in the high country, not in the shadows of men like Pike, but somewhere he could build a warm room in a cold world, a tavern, home. Sleep came slow, but when it finally arrived, it carried him into a future he could almost see. Lamplight, laughter, clinking glasses, a fire crackling in a stone hearth while the wind howled harmlessly outside. For the first time since burying his family, Elias Carter's dreams were not of loss. They were of building. And he intended to see them through. Different. Not because it was smoother. If anything, it was worse in places than the routes he'd taken west. Not because it was safer. Wolves, storms, and men could still appear from nowhere with bad intentions. It felt different because for the first time since he'd left his family's farm, Elias Carter wasn't wandering. He was heading toward something. The money, tucked under his shirt, sat like a steady, reassuring weight against his ribs. Every time doubt tried to whisper in his ear, "Turn back. You don't know what you're doing. This isn't for you." He pressed a hand over it and remembered cold creeks, long nights, and the glittering dust he'd traded for this chance. Pip walked beside him, her limp easing as the days passed. The wound on her flank scabbed and healed beneath the bandage. She still complained about steep hills and rocky patches, but she ate well and, every so often, let out a sound that was almost happy. They traveled through low hills and river valleys, past small clusters of cabins and claims. Some men still headed west, eyes bright with prospecting fever. Others were on their way back east, faces blank or bitter after losing everything. Elias didn't stop to argue with either kind. He'd seen enough of both roads. After a week of steady travel, he reached a crossroads town that didn't yet have a name anyone could agree on. Some called it Willow Crossing, after the line of willow trees along the creek. Others called it Junction, because 3 main trails met there. When asked, the townsfolk usually just shrugged and said, "Here." Here was good enough for now. It wasn't big like the mining town he'd left behind. It didn't have 6 saloons and a line of tents full of desperate men. It had a single, modest general store, a blacksmith's forge, a half-finished church, and a scattering of homes built from rough-hewn logs and whatever planks folks could scavenge. It was rough, but it was growing. And it had something that others didn't. Room. Room for another building. Room for a sign with a name on it. Room for a man to start fresh without being smothered by the dust of 10,000 other dreams. Elias stood on the hill overlooking the town as the evening sun dipped low and turned everything gold. "What do you think, Pip?" he asked softly. "Good soil for a tavern?" Pip chewed a mouthful of grass and declined to comment. He smiled. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The next days were full of questions. He went to the general store first, a larger, sturdier structure than most, with a wide porch and barrels out front. A woman in her 40s with sleeves rolled up to her elbows stood behind the counter, sorting inventory with efficient hands and a keen eye. She wore her dark hair braided and pinned at the back of her head. "You're new," she said, barely glancing up. "I am," Elias replied. "Name's Elias Carter." "May Ellison," she said. "This your claim, Carter?" "Not a gold claim." That made her look up properly. "Ah," she said, studying him, not unkindly, just carefully. "Then what kind of claim is it?" "Land," Elias said, "and a building, maybe 2 if I'm lucky." "You gonna farm it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am, I'm gonna build a tavern." May blinked once, then laughed. "Well, now, that's a first. Men ride west for gold. They ride east when their luck runs out. I haven't yet heard of one who walks away from dust just to serve stew and beer." Elias smiled faintly. My father wanted a tavern his whole life. Never got the chance. I aim to fix that. Something in his tone softened her gaze. Well then, she said, you'll be wanting to talk to Mr. Dobbs about land. Who's Mr. Dobbs? Surveyor, more or less. Knows who owns what, who's squatting, who's leaving. You'll find him at the edge of town arguing with fence posts most days. She gave him directions, then added, If you do build it, Carter, I'll be your first paying customer. These folks need a place to sit that ain't my store porch. I'll hold you to that, Elias said. Mr. Dobbs turned out to be exactly where May said he'd be, standing in a field on the south side of town with a rolled-up map in one hand and a piece of string in the other, muttering about boundaries and markers as if the earth itself had offended him. He was thin, with a nose that looked like it had been broken twice and a hat too big for his head. But his eyes were sharp, and his map, though smudged, was carefully drawn. You want land? He said when Elias announced his purpose. Everyone wants land. Land and a miracle. You got money? I do. Then you're already ahead of half this town. Dobbs squinted at him. What do you plan to build? A tavern, Elias said. Dobbs's brows lifted. A tavern. Huh. Haven't got one of those yet. Got men who drink like they're in one, but no place to put them except the road and Miss May's porch. I'd like something near the center, Elias said, close to the main road, with room for hitching posts and maybe some rooms upstairs someday. You don't ask for much, do you? Dobbs grumbled. He unrolled his map and pointed at a square near the road that split into 3 branches. There's a parcel here. Owner packed up and left last winter. Couldn't make the soil work. No one's taken it yet. Needs work. Leveling, clearing, but it's decent. Elias's heart jumped. How much? Dobbs named a price. It hurt, but not as much as Elias feared it might. He counted out the money carefully, fingers steady despite the way his chest tightened with each bill laid in Dobbs's hand. This was it. The first big cut into the pile he'd nearly died to earn. Dobbs checked the count, nodded, and scribbled something on his map. Land's yours now, Carter, he said. I'll mark it official-like when the circuit judge comes through next month. Until then, you put your stakes in the ground and start hammering. Folks'll know to leave it be. Elias let out a slow breath he felt like he'd been holding since the mountains. Thank you. Dobbs shrugged. Don't thank me. Thank the man who planted a dream on bad soil and had the good sense to leave it for someone else. I'll be by to argue with your fence posts a week from now. Standing in the middle of his new parcel, Elias tried to see it how it would be. Right now it was uneven dirt, tufts of stubborn grass, a few rocks that needed moving, and the marks of someone's failed farm. Half a furrow here, a broken fence post there. The road ran along one side, busy enough to bring customers, but not so busy the dust would choke them. He closed his eyes. In his mind, the dirt flattened, packed firm. Wooden posts rose from it, thick and strong. Beams stretched overhead. Walls took shape, rough at first, then smoother, sanded and planed. A porch extended toward the road, with a railing for leaning and a hitching rail for tired horses and mules. A sign hung from a crossbeam above the door, painted with careful hands. He could almost see the letters. Almost. Pip wandered through the imaginary doorway and snorted. "You're right," he chuckled. "We're not there yet." But they would be. He rolled up his sleeves, and he got to work. Days turned into weeks. The sound of hammering became as much a part of Willow Crossing, Junction, here, as the birds and the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. Elias started with the frame. He bought lumber from a mill downriver, rough planks that needed planing, beams that needed trimming. He hauled them with Pip's grudging help, sweat stinging his eyes, hands blistering and then hardening. He drove his first nail with a hand that shook from how much it mattered. The skeleton of the tavern rose slowly, like a creature lifting itself out of the ground. Neighbors watched. At first, they watched warily, as if waiting for him to fail. Then some of them began to wander over and offer advice whether he wanted it or not. "You're putting that beam too low," one farmer said. "You'll have tall men cracking their heads on it. That corner will catch the wind and rattle in a storm," an older woman remarked. "Angle it here instead. Trust me, I've lost more roofs than you've worn hats. Leave space for a stovepipe there," the blacksmith, a heavy-set man named Orrin, advised. "You don't want to cut through your joists later." Elias listened. He adjusted. Once in a while, they even helped. Orrin came by on a Sunday afternoon with his teenage son and spent 3 hours hauling beams into place. Miss May Ellison appeared one evening with a pot of stew and left it without comment, muttering, "Can't build on an empty stomach." Elias ate standing beside his half-framed wall, tears prickling his eyes. He wasn't used to this kindness that didn't come with a catch. He didn't say much about it. He just worked harder. When the walls went up, the tavern stopped being an idea and became a thing. Weathered boards formed the exterior. The front door was solid pine with iron hinges purchased from the smithy and installed with almost reverent care. Window openings gaped like missing teeth at first, but soon held glass panes bought with another painful bite out of his money. He built the bar himself. It was the part he cared about most. He took extra time finding the right plank, a long, thick piece of wood with a grain that curved like a river. He sanded it until it was smooth under his hands, then sanded it again. At night, with lantern light throwing shadows across the floor, he oiled it slowly, watching the wood darken and shine. He could see his father's hands in his memory, tracing the same line. "You'd like this," Elias murmured one night, running his palm along the polished surface. "Sturdy, straight, not too fancy." Pip, curled up in the back corner near a pile of hay, snorted approval. Shelves went up behind the bar. Tables came next, simple, square, strong, made from leftover planks. Benches followed. A stone hearth took form along one wall, built from rocks hauled in a wheelbarrow borrowed from Dobbs. The fireplace was rough, the stones not perfectly aligned, but it was solid. When Elias lit a fire there for the first time, warmth spread through the unfinished room in a way that made something in his chest finally ease. It felt right. Home, even, though he didn't yet sleep there. The sign came last. Elias could have left it plain, just tavern scrawled in paint on a board. But that wasn't enough. Not for this. He spent half a day cutting the board, smoothing it, sanding the edges. He borrowed paint and brushes from May's store, paying for them with coin he could barely spare. He stood outside in the fading light, the unfinished sign resting across two barrels, and stared at the blank wood. His hand trembled when he dipped the brush for the first stroke. Carefully, slowly, he painted the lettering. Carter's Tavern. Not in fancy script. He didn't know how to do that. But in steady, firm strokes. Letters that stood straight and clear, like his father's handwriting had in the family Bible. He stepped back and looked at it, brush hanging forgotten in his hand. The sun was going down behind the trees, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. The sign caught the light, the fresh paint gleaming slightly. He felt that same tightness in his throat he'd felt by the graves back home. Only this time the grief was braided with something else. Pride. "You made it, Pa," he whispered. He didn't know if ghosts could travel this far, but if they could, he hoped his father was standing somewhere nearby, hands on his hips, a smile in his eyes. Maybe his mother had flour on her hands, fussing over whether he'd remembered a proper stove for the kitchen. Maybe his sister was swinging her legs from a bar stool that didn't exist yet. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the sign was still there. Real. He hung it the next morning. Orrin and Dobbs helped him lift it into place, securing it to a crossbeam above the front porch. When they stepped back, May stood on the road with her hands on her hips, nodding. "Looks good," she declared. "Now all you need is to open the door." That happened 2 days later. The tavern wasn't perfect. The upstairs wasn't finished yet. No proper sleeping rooms, just empty rafters and plans. Some of the chairs wobbled more than he liked. There were only 3 proper beer barrels to start with, and he had more stew pots than he did recipes. But he had 4 walls, a bar, tables, a fire, and a sign. Word had spread faster than he expected. People in small towns liked new things, especially when those new things promised food, warmth, and a place to sit that wasn't a porch step. The late afternoon of opening day, Elias stood behind the bar in a clean shirt, hair combed back, hands pressed flat on the polished wood to keep them from shaking. Pip watched through the back doorway, tethered to a post in the small yard. She'd tried to come inside until May had laughed and said, "Donkeys at the bar is where I draw the line." The first customer through the door was May herself. She took a long look around, inhaled deeply, and nodded. "Smells better than my store. Less dust, more hope." Elias laughed, the sound feeling strange and wonderful in his chest. "What'll you have?" he asked. "A bowl of whatever's on the fire," she said, "and a mug of whatever you've got that won't put me on the floor before supper." He served her. More people came. Orrin and his son. Dobbs, grumbling about boundaries but smiling behind his mustache. A couple of ranch hands from out of town. A young mother with tired eyes who just wanted to sit by the hearth and let her children stare into the flames for a while, instead of the hard-packed dirt outside. The room filled with voices, not the wild, desperate shouting of the mining town saloons, though 1 or 2 men laughed too loud. This was different, softer, a little awkward at first, like everyone was stepping gingerly into something fragile. Elias moved behind the bar, his body remembering motions he'd never done before, as if they'd always been waiting in his muscles. Pouring, wiping, passing mugs, collecting empty ones, offering another if someone's shoulders sagged in the kind of way that said they needed it. He stirred a pot of stew, ladled it into bowls, and felt a deep, quiet satisfaction every time he set a hot meal in front of someone. At one point, as the sun set and lamplight took over, a lull settled. He leaned against the bar, watching. The fire crackled, shadows danced on the wooden walls, men talked in low tones about fences, cattle, seed, and storms instead of gold they'd never find. A child laughed at something May said. Orrin told a story that made 3 people groan and 1 woman roll her eyes. This, he thought, is what Pa wanted. Not riches, not fame, just this, a warm room in a cold world. Later that night, after the last customer left and the lamps were extinguished one by one, Elias stepped out onto the porch. The town was quiet under a blanket of stars. A dog barked in the distance, then settled. Wind rustled the grass along the road. The sign above him creaked softly in the breeze. He sat on the top step, elbows on his knees, and looked up at the letters. Carter's Tavern. He thought back over the road that had led him here. The graves on the farm, the wagon train, Samuel Briggs fallen to an arrow, Ruth buried beneath a crooked pine, Jarrett's cruel grin and Grady's kind one. Pip standing stubborn in the snow, the creek glittering with gold, the bandits in the pines, Pike's eyes in the mining town street, the marshal's badge catching the light, Harker counting out bills with steady hands, May's first bowl of stew, every step, every loss, every hard mile and narrow escape had been payment, not for the gold, for this. He felt the weight of it all settle in his chest, not crushing now, but anchoring. He wasn't drifting any more. He was rooted. Pa, he said quietly, looking up at the stars, I kept my promise. The night didn't answer, but the wind shifted, gentle and cool, brushing across his face like a hand. Down the side of the building, in the small yard where she slept, Pip let out a short, satisfied bray and then settled again. Elias smiled. He stood and turned back inside. There were floors to sweep, mugs to clean, wood to stack by the hearth. Tomorrow there would be more people, more stew, more weary travelers needing a place to sit and remember that not every part of the world was cruel. He banked the fire carefully, the embers glowing like little flecks of gold in the dark. Not enough to make a man rich, just enough to keep him warm. Elias Carter blew out the last lamp, turned once more to look at the room that was finally his, and then headed upstairs to sleep above his tavern. Above his name, above his father's dream, made real by his own battered hands. Outside, under the swinging sign, the night wrapped itself around Carter's Tavern like a cloak, and for the first time in a long time, the world, hard, dangerous, and wild as it was, felt just a little bit kinder.